Thank you, Guru. Now, there are several aspects to being a dynamic public speaker. There's eye contact, vocal variety, facial expressions, body language, and so much more. Today, we are going to focus on engagement. As was mentioned in my introduction, I gave this workshop a couple of months ago to the National or the North American Securities Administrators Association. That is quite the mouthful. And you will see a few areas where I have tailored content to this group. They provide investor education. So that's an engagement point for you right there. If you're speaking to a group, typically you want to try to tailor your content somewhat to that group. So let me ask you a question, and feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. What do you think the worst time of day is for engagement? Thoughts?
2 p.m.
2 p.m., 3:30 p.m., after lunch.
Right after lunch. Yeah.
Right after lunch, 5 p.m. You know, there's probably no perfect time, and all of them can be very challenging. When I asked this question of the audience, it was right after lunch, which is probably the worst time. I would say right before lunch can be almost just as bad. Many years ago, I was the before lunch speaker. I had the time slot from 11 to 12. There was a keynote speaker before me, and at 11 o'clock, he was still going strong. 11:05, 11:10, and then I started wondering, how am I going to adjust my content? I had slides. That's one of the disadvantages of having slides if your content gets squished. 11:15, he's still talking. He happened to be a well-known TV personality in the Twin Cities area. I won't say his name. If you lived in the area, you probably would know him. Finally, 11:20, he finishes. And as I'm walking up, I'm thinking, I'm just gonna cut my last point. I will do my first 2 points and then hit a conclusion. And I did that and was able to end right before lunch, because you know what? You do not want to be between your audience and lunch. You will not be popular. Looking at why some presenters fail to engage their audience, I'm not doing this as an actual poll. You're going to be using the chat. I'll give you 4 options. Is it monotonous delivery? Is it irrelevant content, inadequate interaction, or a poor presentation structure? What do you think would be the biggest reason? Go ahead and put the letter. You can put A, B, C, D, so you don't have to type so much. And I see Linda had poor presentation structure. Rodney picked them all. Albert picked A. Stan picked D, all of the above, all of the above. C, perhaps did not study the audience. A, you know what? You are all correct. All of these things can be reasons why an audience fails, or excuse me, a presenter fails to engage an audience. If I was forced to pick one, I'd probably pick one that no one else picked. I'd probably pick irrelevant content. Because if your content does not connect and it's irrelevant to the audience, you know, maybe you're a great presenter, but they're going to be wondering if they're just wasting their time. Now, I want you to think to a memorable speech that you've heard and think about, how did the speaker engage the audience? I am going to ask a couple of people to share. Think about a speech you heard, a memorable speech. What was something that the speaker did or said, or how they said it, that engaged the audience? It might have been at a conference. It might have been at a Toastmasters contest. I see Connie has unmuted. So you have something to share, right, Connie?
I could. I remember in college when I think a dynamic speaker, I thought she could have been Martin Luther King's sister, but she kept on saying this repetitive thing, inspiring kids. Mountain, get out of my way. And she did it with so much enthusiasm. And it was a
Right.
repetition thing.
So it was a repetition of a phrase that really connected with the audience. Who else has something they might like to share about a memorable speech? Rodney?
Last month, we actually had a guest speaker in Toastmasters, Michael, and he taught on some techniques to use Canva and Zoom. And I was just glued to the screen for the whole time. It was great.
What made you glued to the screen? Was it the content was captivating?
I think that, plus also the process, he knew what he was doing, and it was stuff that was not the everyday clickbait kind of stuff. It was relevant things that you could do something about.
So relevancy is certainly important. Now, this presentation was a 50-minute presentation. So I'm going to go through some things pretty quickly in the next several minutes. So the items I will be covering and you will learn a little bit about is how to plan for engagement using different learning modes and assessing and modifying engagement. I'm not going to talk about PowerPoint delivery style or how to build your confidence. All of those things are important and can be engaging. I do have a resource page for you, which I will share again at the end. So if you want to hold your phone's camera up, the QR code will take you to that page. It will have a PDF of these slides, a link to some of the books that I have on Amazon, an infographic on impromptu speaking, a short video on speaking with confidence today, a link to toastmasters.org. You see, when I gave this, these were not Toastmasters, so I promoted Toastmasters a little bit. And a link for a complimentary consult with me via Zoom. So again, I'll show this slide right at the end. Planning for engagement. There's the power of threes, there's storytelling, and there's interaction. And there's so much more, but I have limited time. Now, I would like people to unmute, and I have to be able to see people. Wait, I gotta get right here. My bar didn't move. So I have no idea. Oh, there's where people are. I have too much open on my screen. Go ahead and unmute, and I'm going to ask some unmuted people to do a very simple participation. So things arranged in threes are more satisfying, they're more effective and more memorable than other numbers. So Albert, I'm going to put the beginning of a phrase and I will read it and I would like you to finish it. Life, liberty, and the...
Life, liberty, and justice.
Good guess. So it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes, yeah.
And, you know, if you did not grow up in the US, that might not be such an easy phrase. Let's try another one. Let's go with Stan. Blood, sweat, and...
A wonderful band called Tears.
Very funny. Blood, sweat, and tears. Okay, you know what? I am going to ask, we're going to go back and we're going to give Albert another shot. Albert, breakfast, lunch, and...
Dinner, because that's what we do at Virtual Professional. We give you feedback to last for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Very good. Okay, one more. This is a really simple one. How about guru? So tough. Beginning, middle, and
End.
the end. Right.
The end.
So you can even use it in construction. You can have a 3-point speech. People can remember 3 points, much better than if you have 10 points. All right, a little introduction on storytelling. You could have an entire half day or longer seminar just on storytelling. You're going to get about 3 minutes here. Why should you tell stories? What stories to tell? And how to tell stories. Why tell them? Because a fact wrapped in story is 22 times more memorable. Facts may tell, but stories sell, and they stick in people's minds. So what stories to tell? If you're speaking professionally, you want to tell relevant stories. You want to perhaps have some personal stories that might relate to your audience. You might have some success stories. When I was talking to these investor educators, I picked topics that they would speak on. That's why you see those as the example of budgeting and compounding interest. You might have a cautionary tale, again, for the investor educators, risks, scams, etc., and many more. Now, how do you tell a story? There's a lot of ways to tell a story. This is a very basic framework for what I call sort of the hero's journey story. You want to give just a little bit of context, a little bit of time, a little place, some characters, maybe they have a goal. Then there has to be a challenge, some obstacle to the goal. Then there's often some rising action, more stuff happens. There's usually a turning point in the story where things change. Then there's falling action, and finally resolution. Now, I've got a fun question for you. Have I shown you the graph of a story with a happy ending or a sad ending? You can put that in the chat if you like. Happy or sad? Linda says either one. I didn't tell you how to interpret this. I want to see the sad. I will say, because the end is higher than the beginning, this would represent a story that has a happy ending. Now, it is a bonus if you can add dialogue with another person or inner dialogue. At this point, I'm going to give you a very short opportunity to share a story with another person in a breakout room. You'll only have about 2 minutes each. What I would like you to use for your story, if you have a business story where your product or service made a difference for someone, feel free to use that. Otherwise, pick a story about a time you learned a lesson, maybe the hard way. So I'll open up the rooms, take turns telling a story. There'll be 2 in a room. And then when we come back, we might hear one of them. Who has a short story they can share with the entire group?
I'll share.
Go ahead, Darlene.
Like in 30 seconds?
To 1 minute, yeah.
Okay. So I trained success and excellence and had a woman come in this training for growing her business, starting a business. She was transitioning. And by the end of the day, she realized that, in fact, she needed to be there for her own personal growth and kept sharing her aha moments. The night before graduation, had a big blow up with her husband and reverted back to old skills instead of new skills, and had her aha moment the hard way, and realized that she did have skills to create a safe environment for her and her husband to have good, healthy conversations.
Well, that's great. That's a success story.
Yes.
Now, here's a tip for you. If you have time in a workshop and you have people talk in a small group first, they will often be a little more willing to speak in front of the whole group because they've already talked with another person about the idea. Let's talk a little more, very briefly again, about interaction. So there's a lot of things you can do for interaction. You can ask questions. You can use polls or interactive platforms. On my own Zoom meetings, I sometimes will set up a poll, but I usually don't do that if I'm on someone else's Zoom. And you can just use the chat like I've done, and I tried to make it easy by having things like letters, A, B, C, D, so you wouldn't have to type the whole thing. You can even do body voting if you're in person, or you can do it on Zoom. So raise your physical hand if you've been a Toastmaster for 1 year or more. Okay, that was most people who've been a Toastmaster for 1 year or more. How about, let's do a big jump, 10 years. 10 years? All right. How about 20 years? Okay, there's 3 of us. How about 25 years? All right, Stan, you're the longest term Toastmaster here. How many years?
It's coming up on 40.
Wow, you must have been a small child when you joined.
I was thin and my hair was dark.
Oh, funny. So if you're going to do this, it can be a quick way to get some interaction, to get some movement. I had people stand up for an in-person event, and I tried to ask a question that was likely to have most of the people stand up. So pick a question where you're going to have most of the people, and then you can kind of dwindle it down. You can also do group brainstorming as an interaction. You can have partner or group discussions. Of course, you can use breakout rooms for that if you're in an online environment, and you can also use chat if you're online. You might have some kinds of competition. You might have to think about it. There are platforms where you can have competition. One time I even did a rock, paper, scissors competition. It only took about 8 minutes because they started out with 2 people, and then the loser had to move on with the winner and cheer on the winner. And so every time someone lost, they had to cheer on a winner. So it only took like 8 minutes to get a crowd of 100 down to 2 people. It was really a lot of fun, but it really should relate to what you're talking about too. You can do role plays, although I'd be very careful. Most people do not like role plays. If you're talking to a sales group, they might be more up to doing a role play. And you can use icebreakers. Icebreakers are often near the beginning to warm up a group, some little activity. It could even just be introductions. So in the chat, I just want to know if you ever use icebreakers in your presentation. Just put yes or no if you use icebreakers. Stan says yes. And if you don't, it's okay to put no or N. And if we had a longer presentation, I would ask for some examples. What I am going to give you is the examples I gave at the meeting. These were investment educators, and they would often have groups of people in the public. So they wanted some icebreaker ideas. And you know what I did? I went to ChatGPT to get these ideas. In fact, ChatGPT gave me way more than this, but I just picked a few. And some of them you could probably see how you might change it to be what you talk about. So I have a hypothetical scenario where you pose a question. That's one idea. And here I have personal financial goal sharing. Well, maybe you speak on weight loss. You might have people have weight loss goal sharing. Investor personality type. Maybe you speak on leadership or communication. You might have a really quick way to have people select what kind of leader or what kind of communicator they are. You might have a myth versus fact kind of activity where you present a series of statements and have people guess whether it's a myth or a fact. So those are just a few ideas. If you speak in a particular industry or on a particular topic, try out ChatGPT. I was pretty impressed that I got these. Now, you can also use different learning modes. You may have heard of the modes or learning styles of visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic, which is also called VARK. Now, What do you think might be your primary learning style? Put a 1 if you think it's visual, a 2 if you think your primary learning style is auditory, 3 for reading and writing, and 4, kinesthetic means sort of like hands-on. That's what that means. I am seeing a lot of 3s, reading and writing. Wow, that's pretty impressive. A few 1s, a 1 and a 4. Now, I don't want to make you feel bad, but I had objectives that they were given to me by the event planners, and they wanted me to address this. And I said, okay, I'll address it, but it's a myth. Evidence does not support the theory of learning styles, despite decades of popular belief. But using multiple modes of teaching can improve learning across the board, sort of a multimedia effect. So I'm just quickly going to mention these, and they should be pretty basic. You can grab people visually with slides, charts, images, color, videos. Auditory can be when you vary your pitch, your volume, your pace. You can use stories and examples. Reading and writing can be providing written materials, handouts. You can use the chat feature. Kinesthetic can be even when you use a prop, people will imagine themselves doing what you're doing. You might have physical activities, body language, gestures that you use. You can use polls and games. So we could go deep into this, but we're not. Instead, we're going to close on assessing and modifying engagement, which is basically reading the audience and adapting. All right. So I hope you never face an audience like this. You can tell they're not engaged, right? So I'm going to ask someone to pretend to be the presenter. You don't even have to do anything other than you're just going to comment on something in a moment. And I will pick Jess. You are the pretend presenter. Don't worry, you don't have to say much. And I want everybody else, as much as you can, to act like you are not engaged. Jess is presenting and you are not engaged. What do you do with your facial expression, with your body language? Are you looking at your phone, your eye contact, your energy level? So Jess, unmute yourself and tell me what you're
Okay.
seeing. What do you see, Jess?
I'm looking, people are looking all over the place, but me. They are not like, with the body language is not like upfront, but laid back, right?
Mhm.
Just a yawning. Oh, the cell phone. They, no one is smiling, I think.
No one's smiling. I know that, except I am. I couldn't do it.
I
All
know.
right. Jess, I don't want to leave you with these people who are unengaged. So now I want everybody to be really engaged. Like you are hanging on every word Jess is saying. You agree with her. You are so enthralled by her content. What do you look like when that happens? So Jess,
Smile. They all look bigger.
are,
Actually, they
is
do.
it a better experience for you too, right?
Yes, definitely. Even I straight up
Yes,
when I
yeah.
saw them. Yes.
So you can recognize signs that an audience is not engaged if you're paying a little bit of attention. And then what do you do to adapt? A lot of things can be done. You can adjust your pace. I have a client who's a politician. He actually speaks so fast that he loses people. So he needs to sometimes pause and let his point sink in. You can also pick up the pace to make it more exciting, go a little bit faster. You may need to be flexible with your content. If you see something isn't landing, maybe now's the time to have the audience ask you questions, an impromptu Q&A, or you might ask them questions. You might cut out some content. You might decide, okay, I better wake them up with a story and tell a related story. Again, you can ask questions where they raise your hand. So by a show of hands, do you enjoy Toastmasters? And, get them to raise their hands. You might move into a discussion or a group activity to kind of shake things up a little bit. Again, you could tell a relevant story or a case study. So today, I have covered a lot of content, planning for engagement, using different learning modes or teaching modes, assessing and modifying the engagement to keep your audience engaged. I would love to hear, what is one or two takeaways? Not everyone has to say something, but I would love one or two takeaways from just a few people. Stan, you're off of mute. Do you have something to contribute?
I did that by accident, but learning styles as a myth was fun.
All right.
Since I'm a professional trainer, I find that particularly interesting.
Yeah, do some research on it. There's some value to changing up how you do things, but there's not a lot of support actually in the literature in research. Priyanka, do you have something?
I think your storytelling structure was very informative.
Well, good.
Sure.
Thank you. And as I promised, I said I would end with this slide, which I will leave up for just a few seconds. If you want to put your phone up, you can get the QR code. Later on, I will put that link after I find it again in the chat as well. Thank you very much, and back to the Toastmaster.